Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kishore Mahbubani. I'm the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this event. I see that the rain hasn't deterred you all from coming here, although I expect quite a few more people will be coming in gradually this evening. Let me also mention at the outset that I want to thank Singtel. And after this, I'll have the pleasure of inviting Alex Fenby up here to say a few words and thank him for sponsoring these events. My role, as usual, will be to make 3 points before the occasion begins. My first point, which in 10 years ago would have been seen like a completely innocuous statement, but which today is a highly provocative statement. And that provocative statement is, globalization is good. Now, as you all know, that's almost a suicidal statement to make in some countries today, but the evidence is so overwhelming. I mean, that's actually why I decided, one of the things I did this year was to co-author an article with Larry Summers in Foreign Affairs. The topic was fusion of civilizations, but if those of you read it, it began very optimistic view of the world, saying how poverty is being eliminated, global middle classes exploding by all the indicators of human well-being, health, education. The world actually has never been a better place. And all this is happening fundamentally because of the spread of globalization. So it's important to emphasize that point because that's what used to be conventional wisdom is now being rejected in many places. And that's, of course, leads me to my natural second point, which is that the anti-globalization movement is, of course, gaining tremendous momentum. You see it in Europe, you see it in the emergence of the far-right parties, you definitely see it, you saw it rather with the Brexit event. I mean, we can have a long discussion about the meaning of Brexit, but clearly it also resulted from an impulse to close the borders and say, we want to become what we are, we want to cut ourselves off from the world. And of course, you also see it I'm going to say this very delicately, in the Donald Trump phenomenon. But having said that, I want to quickly emphasize, make a key point that today's discussion is not about the US elections. Just in case you all thought you're going to come here and do a dissection of the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump elections. This is actually hopefully a very serious discussion about some very major long-term issues that we have to deal with. What's going to happen to TPP, what's going to happen to One Belt, One Road, and what evolves with these two things, for example, will have a dramatic influence on the future course of history of our region. So we will try and stay focused in that area. Now, having said that, now come to the third and most pleasant part of my duty, which is to introduce the two speakers. And I must say, we are really privileged here to have Ambassador Kirk Wagar and Professor Danny Quah here to address the subject. And I'll just give a very brief description of them because both of them have very illustrious careers. Kirk was sworn in as the United States Ambassador to Singapore on September 4th, 2013. Previously, he was managing partner of Wagar Law, a Miami-based law firm that focused on contract and insurance litigation. He served on the Sub-Saharan African Advisory Committee of the Exim Bank in 2010 and on the full Exim Bank Advisory Committee for the 2011-2012 terms. Mr. Wagar was also the Florida Finance Chair for President Obama and a trustee of the inaugural committee in 2009 and 2013. And if you want to know why US-Singapore relations have become so good, it does help that Ambassador Kirk Wagar happens to know President Obama quite well. So maybe a round of applause for Kirk Wagar for the exceptional work he's done for US-Singapore relations. Yeah. And he's got many other illustrious aspects to his career, but I want to mention also that he received his BA from Robert Wesleyan College and a JD from the University of Miami. Now let me briefly introduce Professor Danny Quah, who's now the Lee Ka-shing Professor of Economics at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. His current research is on economic approach to world order, global power shift, the rise of the East, and models of great power relations. I want to add here that Danny Quah gave the third LSE and US lecture in 2013. He's given TEDx talks in 2016, 2014, and 2012, and the inaugural LSE Big Questions lecture in 2011. Just go to YouTube and you'll see Danny Quah. In 2016, he was named one of the top 100 economics blogs in the world, his blog. And his research has been supported by the Khazanah Research Institute, the MacArthur Foundation, the British Academy, the UK's Economic and Research Council, and the Andrew Mellon Foundation. He was previously Assistant Professor of Economics at MIT and then Professor of Economics and International Development at LSE and Director of the Saw Swee Hock Southeast Asia Center at LSE's Institute of Global Affairs. But the most important aspect of his bio is not in my paper here, but I'll add a little bit. The most important thing you need to know about Danny Quah, he's got a black belt in judo. So if I was Kirk, I'd be careful if you argue with him. So with that, let me first turn to Alex. The program is such that I think first we'll have Alex come up and say a few words. And then Kirk will come up and he'll be followed by Danny. And after that, Kirk, Danny and I will have a three-way conversation. Yeah, so Alex, over to you. Thank you all very much.
Brief message from your sponsor. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you to the Honourable Kirk Wagar, US Ambassador to Singapore, Dean Kishore Mahbubani, and Professor Danny Quah for inviting Singtel to say a few words today. My name is Alex Fenby. I'm a director with Singtel on the digital news initiatives. We've launched, you might have seen outside, we've launched a wonderful new service called Singtel Newsstand, which offers best-in-class international and local newspaper and magazine subscriptions to our Singtel subscribers at very deep discounts and with no data charges when reading your publication on the mobile. We are delighted to be partnering with the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy on insightful lectures about the world economy and politics. Today we're fortunate to have a discussion about TPP and China's One Belt, One Road, trade arrangements that will shape Asia's economic landscape for years to come. By offering titles like the Straits Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Fortune Magazine, and just recently The Economist and the New York Times, Singtel Newsstand, like these school lectures, aims to offer students and the public in general a better understanding of the complex world around us. You can find out more about Singtel Newsstand outside and afterwards for the food and drinks. So I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to do that one more time. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out on such a rainy day. It is my great pleasure to share with you some of my perspectives on trade integration and the potential impact of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the One Belt, One Road initiative on the region. TPP is the world's most ambitious free trade agreement, with 12 countries representing nearly 40% of the global economy. It's the first agreement of its kind that provides strong labor and environmental protections, promotes transparency and good governance, and across the board brings 21st century standards and norms befitting a new and dynamic global economy. However, most often you see a title like this, with that word "or" in the middle. And I think by the end of this conversation, I hope you will come to be thinking of and, because these two different proposals and economic plans are very different and try and do different things, but I think are more complementary than they are at odds. The big difference is One Belt, One Road is not a free trade agreement or a free trade area. TPP is a multilateral agreement that potentially will lead the world's largest free trade area. In contrast, One Belt, One Road, in simplest terms, is an infrastructure marketing and financing effort that will support the development and integration of trade flows in Asia. These are not mutually exclusive models for this region, and it is not a zero-sum contest for influence. They are altogether in different categories in what they are and what they potentially will do. The next biggest difference is who is steering these campaigns and the underlying motives. TPP came about through negotiation of 12 members united by a common goal, all with an equal voice. TPP evolution began in 2006 under the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership, or the P4, between Singapore, Brunei, Chile, and New Zealand. The United States saw the value and potential for the P4, and in 2008, we expressed interest in negotiating a broader FTA with the P4 members, forming the basis of TPP. Eventually, it evolved into 12 countries across 3 continents, and they recognized that TPP is something they could not afford to miss out on. Since its signing earlier this year, many more countries have expressed interest in joining the next round, seeing the great value of being part of a free trade arena that covers nearly 40% of the global economic output and 1/3 of all global trade. In contrast, One Belt, One Road is driven by one country, China, with countries in the region partnering in a bilateral sense with China on various projects linked to this domestic agenda. One Belt, One Road is largely a bilateral effort across many partners, but all linked to one country. In one way or another, all roads lead back to China. So this clearly will benefit China's economy and trading routes by reinvigorating the centuries-old Silk Road. By its own proclamation, China launched One Belt, One Road to redirect China's domestic overcapacity and capital to infrastructure projects in the region, a form of domestic economic stimulus. Besides providing an outlet for its own overcapacity, China hopes the resulting infrastructure and networks will help expand its trade flow to ASEAN, Central Asia, and European countries. TPP, in contrast, is about broad trade integration on 3 continents, benefiting all who join. The most important difference, however, and the one I feel most clearly sets TPP and OBOR on different paths, is the impact on the standards and norms. Fundamentally, TPP is about establishing higher standards, enforceable rules, robust regulations, and common market access. I want to underscore here a critical point. When it comes to bringing greater standards and robust regulations, these are not US-driven values, but are the standards embodied in TPP that reflect best practices in trade and integration of the world's leading economies. It's not fair to contrast TPP and OBOR as a US versus China. In fact, I think that's rather simplistic, because TPP embodies the collective philosophies and economic ambitions of many advanced economies, which recognizes the need for 21st century norms and standards to shape and steer an increasingly interconnected global economy. But in short, there is no either or here. We are talking about an infrastructure development and financing model on one hand, with the potential to facilitate trade integration, and the world's most robust, ambitious multilateral trade deal on the other hand, with the potential to define and promote higher trade standards in global free trade for decades to come. Let me get into some specifics. TPP sets the highest standards ever sought for a multilateral FTA. As laid out in TPP itself, TPP will establish a comprehensive regional agreement that promotes economic integration, with the underlying goals to liberalize trade and investment, bring economic growth and social benefits, create new opportunities for workers and businesses, contribute to raising living wages, benefit consumers, reduce poverty, and promote sustainable growth. Those are just things that One Belt, One Road has no interest in. It is not focus of what it is. So that or is the one thing that we answered the most questions about, but I think it's not the right question. TPP will require a minimum wage, put in place worker safety regulation, prohibit forced labor and child labor. It will address illegal wildlife trafficking, illegal fishing, and illegal logging in one of the most biologically diverse regions in the world. It'll strengthen the competitiveness of businesses in global markets and enhance the competitiveness of TPP members' economies. It will support the growth and development of micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. It will establish a predictable legal and commercial framework for trade and investment through mutually advantageous rules. It will facilitate regional trade by promoting efficient and transparent customs procedures. It will promote levels of environmental protections, including through effective enforcement of environmental laws, and further the aims of sustainable development. It will promote transparency, good governance, and the rule of law, and eliminate bribery and corruption in trade and investment. As each of these areas reveal, TPP looks forward. It is really about injecting 21st century standards into a 21st century economy. We are in a new economic era where labor, environment, transparency, innovation, and sustainability are increasingly important concerns. Further, the nature of trade itself is changing, with a growing volume of commerce flowing digitally, features a hefty degree of services and e-commerce, which will benefit much more from growing fiber optic networks and expanded shipping and railway networks. With TPP, we will finally have the first trade agreement that reflects the realities of the digital age by protecting a free and open internet and preventing unfair rules that restrict free flow of data. One Belt, One Road projects might support greater connectivity, providing Infocom technology networks to communities throughout the region. If they do, it will serve the goals of TPP well. But TPP establishes the standards, opens the markets, and equalizes the opportunities that will considerably impact global economy. Ultimately, TPP strives to be the foundation of the future trade area of the Asia-Pacific by establishing norms, rules, standards, policies, and practices for the benefit of the entire region. But TPP and OBOR have one similarity. It is that both stand to facilitate and boost overall trade volumes in this region. In this, they are incredibly complementary, and the impact that each may have on expanding regional trade will be expanded by them both coming into effect. Projections suggest that increased trade integration between TPP members will lead to a greater volume of trade. The World Bank estimates that TPP could raise GDP in member countries by an average of 1.1% and increase member countries' trade by 11% by 2030. Infrastructure developed under OBOR will support these greater trade volumes anticipated among TPP members, helping make TPP even more impactful. This in turn can attract more TPP aspirants. From the moment I have started talking about this topic, we have often said that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is not a party that you get invited to. If you meet the high standards that are negotiated, we welcome you. And we would welcome China and many other countries in the region once they reach these high standards to join. And in fact, negotiating the bilateral investment treaty with China is essentially that section of TPP. In conclusion, I will remain confident the United States Congress will ultimately pass TPP. It is in our own best interest to do so, and in the interest of the countries everywhere that value stronger norms, standards, free and open markets, and labor and environmental protection. If TPP does not pass, for reasons that I have laid out today, One Belt, One Road is not going to fill that remaining gap. It cannot. It does different things. TPP is about enhancing rules, raising standards, leveling the playing field, and market liberalization. That is not the goal of One Belt, One Road. And One Belt, One Road will suffer itself through the loss of greater trade integration should TPP not be brought across the line. So, my ultimate conclusion here today is that it's in the region's interest to embrace both the standards and norms laid out in TPP, as well as the positive impact of One Belt, One Road. And we can support the trajectory towards a 21st century model of high standards trade integration by facilitating infrastructure growth that hires volumes of trade from TPP that we will need. I will close with saying I could not agree with Dean Mahbubani more that globalization has been a good thing. And the people in this room all have a voice, whether it be at your dinner table, on Facebook or Twitter, or in classrooms or in boardrooms. It's incumbent on all of us to make that argument, because the other side is winning an argument that we're not even engaged in. So thank you for your attention tonight. I look forward to talking to you later.
Your Excellencies, Dean Kishore, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I did not come here to disagree with His Excellency the Ambassador, but I'm afraid I must. I don't think we disagree on some of the fundamentals, but perhaps on some of the emphases, it is useful to be clear about the difference. He refers to how One Belt, One Road could be viewed as a mechanism for China to export its excess capacity. There's an alternative view that says China has certain factors that give it a comparative advantage in engineering and logistics. And what seems like exporting surplus capacity is simply the workings of international trade. His Excellency gave you the view that says that TPP is mostly about high standards, about putting out norms that are appropriate for the 21st century global economy. There's an alternative view, one espoused by, among other people, my colleague, the distinguished Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, that says that these high standards are in fact not that, but they're simply a veil by which the playing field is tilted in favor of American businesses. Because what is seen as appropriate standards from the perspective of the United States can, from the perspective of a relatively underdeveloped economy, be onerous overhead. We could have a long discussion about that, but that's not where I want to disagree with His Excellency. I want to suggest that there really is something to the idea expressed in the TPP or OBOR that appears in this title. And whether that is real or not, His Excellency and I probably agree that these two large mechanisms are complementary. But in the eyes of the world, and therefore of central importance in geopolitics and in international economics, these are viewed as competitors. They're viewed as competitors in the space of grand strategy. They are articulated as competitive in a zero-sum game. They're viewed as devices by which one side of the world or the other will get to write the rules of the 21st century game. And whether that is reality or not, as simply a technical economist, I would do the calculations about why these are indeed complementary. But in terms of the geopolitical conversation, these are competitive. So I do need to say a little bit about that. There are 3 points I want to make. The first is to expand on the idea that in the space of grand strategies, these are viewed as zero-sum competitors. But second, I want very quickly to suggest that the protagonists that are involved on both sides of this contest are themselves divided within themselves. The protagonist, from the perspective of the United States, is torn about how far to push TPP. And the protagonist, on the other side, for good or bad, seems to be undertaking actions that show an internal cognitive dissonance on its approach to One Belt, One Road. Finally, I want to conclude quickly on what this contest means for the rest of us. 80% of the world actually does not live in either the United States or China. And what matters to us as participants in this global economy is not the victor of this zero-sum game on who gets to write the rules of the game. What matters to us is how it impacts our well-being. So it's that last that I want to focus my discussion. Now, on One Belt, One Road, as His Excellency has laid out for you, it is about transportation and infrastructure. It's sometimes referred to as coming in two pieces, a Silk Road economic belt, and then a maritime Silk Road, which will pass all the way through the South China Sea and the waters around Singapore. Okay, this is trade and investment that's supposed to, in the first instance, affect 40 countries. It's estimated to expand trade by over $2.5 trillion. Is that big or small? Well, it's about the entire GDP of ASEAN. China is expected to put financing into it on the order of hundreds of billions of US dollars. If it does succeed, and there's absolutely no guarantee that it will, but if it does succeed, it will connect up the three largest labor forces in the world, China, India, and right here in ASEAN. What makes this attractive? What makes this attractive is that this is what China does. It doesn't go out there to try and convince you that you ought to come on board because it aligns, your core values align with its. What it does is large-scale financing. What it does is mega-scale engineering projects. It builds the largest things on this planet. And the One Belt, One Road will be yet another of those, if it succeeds. And again, there's no guarantee that it does. It's about mega projects, it's about infrastructure, and thrown into the mix is a race for who gets a bigger say in the international financial architecture. Now, to be clear, China has benefited hugely from the post-war liberal international institutions that have come out of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the current trading system they have. All of that is great. But you and I know that China and others feel constrained by the amount of decision-making power they have within the standard international institutions. So here, at the same time that One Belt, One Road is built, is something else, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And it aligns with this need to provide financing to build engineering infrastructure. All of that seems a fine narrative, a good way to try and get things going. It doesn't claim to write 21st century trading rules. It just wants to build you a bridge. It builds you highways. Why should that matter to us? Here's why it matters. Take Indonesia. Indonesia is a country that has 100,000 kilometers of coastline. It's thousands of islands in an archipelago. If you make a t-shirt in Maluku, in the eastern part of Indonesia, and you transport it to Sumatra to trade with the rest of the world, transportation costs eat up 24% of what you can sell that t-shirt for in Sumatra. If you build better infrastructure, that 24% goes away. That's the only thing that One Belt, One Road is concerned about. It's not concerned about saving the environment. It's not concerned about labor standards, protecting children. It just wants you to trade. It's simple and it's brutal. Okay. TPP, on the other hand, comes with a whole lot of other things. But before we go into that, I mentioned that the protagonists involved in this are torn. Why is China torn about something that it's so good at? Well, here's what I can't quite figure out. There's troubling discord in the South China Sea. Why? This cornerstone of the maritime Silk Road, the first entry from out of the China economy into the rest of the world, sees the aggravation and the disagreement that we currently are experiencing. Is a bit of a puzzle, but one hopes that the economic forces will work it out so that we restore the channels of communication and trade. TPP has an easier story to it because it promises so much more. It's about increasing trade openness. Increasing trade openness not through building bridges, through infrastructure, but by writing down rules. It wants to reduce tariffs. It wants to strengthen intellectual property right protection. It wants to establish standards, and it wants to increase competition, remove the influence that large state-owned enterprises are advantaged over smaller companies. It wants to put in place the workings of a market economy. And here too, there's great promise. It is the United States and 11 other countries. It significantly includes China and India, although both of which say that they could potentially become members. Right now it covers 40% of the world economy. It's a good story as well, despite what some economists say about tilting the playing field in different ways. So if this is such a good story, what's the discord here? Well, it's not the only part of the story that America tells. Here's Barack Obama in 2015 in something he wrote in the Washington Post. He says, you know what I think about when I think about TPP? The world has changed. The rules are changing with it. And he concludes, the United States, not countries like China, should get to write those rules. And here is one of the two current presidential candidates reported in the Atlantic magazine earlier this year. I don't want my grandchildren to live in a world dominated by the Chinese. Okay. And the other presidential candidate has said far ruder things about China. Okay. Where do we go with this? There is obviously competition here, and to deny the competition in the space of ideas is not fruitful. We have to take this on, we have to sort this out. We do need to sort that out, but we're not going to do that in the 3 minutes that I've got left. So let me tell you about Singapore or other countries involved in this clash of grand strategies. Let's take Singapore. Singapore has skin in the game, big time, both in TPP and in One Belt, One Road. It was one of the original four behind the P4 that subsequently became the TPP. It realizes the importance of the United States in security terms in this region, but at the same time, it has a complicated, nuanced relationship with China. Singapore was one of the original 21 signatories on the Memorandum of Understanding that established the AIIB. It was one of the first 17 founding members earlier this year. It is strongly tied, its economic fortunes are strongly tied to those of China. At the same time, Singapore trades 230% of its GDP. 6% of Singapore's exports are to the United States. But 6% of Singapore's export to the United States, that's just half of what Singapore exports to Malaysia. That's only 1/4 of what Singapore exports to China and Hong Kong. And while there are difficulties now, obviously, in the relationship between Singapore and China, Singapore's bread is buttered on the side of trade with the rest of the East. What do I conclude from this quick runaround of this TPP versus OBOR landscape? You know what? It doesn't matter to most of us. Most of us couldn't be bothered to choose between TPP or OBOR. And so His Excellency is exactly right. It is not a dichotomous binary choice. Most of us are pragmatists. And I'll tell you what matters to pragmatists. I'll tell you what matters to me. Every morning I come into the Lee Kuan Yew School, I turn on my computer, and I hope that it boots up well. And when I see it boot up, I see software making it work, and I see hardware on top of which that software runs. That hardware is just a doorstop without the right software to run it. The software couldn't run if it didn't have heavy iron to be running bits on. The world, the pragmatic world, the Singapores of the world, need both OBOR and TPP. And the sooner the superpowers sort out this zero-sum game, you get to write the rules of the game, the better it will be for the rest of us. Thank you very much.